everything that we do at World Trade Center is to help grow small businesses in the state of Utah. And thankfully, we have a great partnership with Marla and her team at the SBA. I love the website, the SBA's website. Let me just read this real quickly. I feel like this perfectly sums up what the Small Business Administration is all about. And it's to the U.S. Small Business Administration helps Americans start, build, and grow businesses. It's very succinct and very clear about what they do, and they have various lending options to help Americans do that. And World Trade Center, we've been the beneficiary of some of their grant funding that we're able to give back to companies we work with. And so we appreciate the natural partnership that exists. And Marla, from there, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So I think we want to have the two senators' offices go first. So Justin from Senator Lee's office. Justin, would you like to start?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks so much, Marla. Appreciate it. And huge shout out to World Trade Center Utah and the SBA for putting on this webinar. It's obviously an important topic to discuss and frankly, a timely topic to discuss as well with the program going live here in the next 2 weeks. But to back up a little bit, my name is Justin Anthony. I serve as Senator Mike Lee's Business Outreach Director. I am based in Salt Lake City out of our office here. And in normal years, when we're not in COVID time, I spend most of my time traveling around the state, meeting with businesses, chambers of commerce, economic development departments, to learn how legislation that we're running or that other members are running affect the business community. Also talk with them about regulations and discuss how we can be helpful on a one-on-one basis as businesses and chambers of commerce and economic development departments interact with agencies on a one-on-one basis. I'll cover a little bit more on that here in a minute. But since COVID, it's been a lot of Zoom meetings, just as I'm sure is the case for everybody that's on this call. And we also realized very quickly with World Trade Center Utah, with the SBA, with Department of Commerce, with Senator Romney's office, that there was so much information coming down the pipeline when we first started. There was information coming from local governments, from state governments, from federal governments. And so we all partnered together in this collaborative effort to take all of that information and funnel it down into 1 or 2 page documents that we would send out once or twice a week so that businesses could basically read through that very quickly and see what's available for them. We realized that you did not have the time to sit there and read 2,000 pages of a legislative bill. And so we wanted to take that information, make it so that, the most important parts were there and available to you as quickly as possible. We also took the time to travel with the SBA when we were permitted to and meet with businesses and do roundtables to discuss how these programs that we passed have actually worked in practice. We can think they're going to work one way, but when you talk with a business and find out that maybe they're not working with that way and how we intended them to, we know that it's time to go back to the drawing board. I think you've seen that quite a few times now with the PPP program. So really appreciate these types of dialogues and these presentations. It's great to be able to hear what the questions are as well. So we look forward to hearing those. And I'm going to turn it over to Trent to talk a little bit more on the legislative piece. But before I do so, I wanted to touch on 2 pieces real quick, one related to our constituent services team and the other related to the PPP program. As for those who watch the Senate and who are following this issue quite closely, the Senate is taking up the PPP extension today and is just about to vote, actually. So going back to constituent services, kind of a lesser known role of members of Congress is to provide constituent service or casework help to individuals within their home state. So we have a member, we actually share our team with Senator Romney. We're the only 2 offices in the country that share the team, but we have 5 individuals that are housed out of Senator Romney's office, 5 individuals that are housed out of Senator Lee's office. And rather than dividing them up based on which office and which member they work for, we divide them up based on issue areas. So we have individuals that work with the IRS, individuals that work with the VA, Social Security, so on and so forth, that eventually cover all federal agencies. So if you let that be a plug, that if you're struggling with the federal agency, if you haven't received your economic impact payment or you're waiting on a response on an EIDL, let us know. Please reach out to us. We certainly want to be helpful. I'll put my email in the chat, and so that you have that, you can email me and I can get you in touch with that team. But we certainly want to be helpful. And with the two teams being merged, whether you reach out to me, whether you reach out to Trent or somebody in Senator Romney's office, ultimately, we're going to make sure that you're getting to that person that serves as both of our liaisons between that agency. To touch really quickly on the PPP program, as many of you may know, last week, the House voted to extend the PPP program's application deadline from March 31st to May 31st. The Senate has brought that up beginning last night and invoked cloture, which is limiting debate to 30 hours. The Senate took it up this morning. There's a number of amendments, I believe 3 total amendments that they're voting on now before what we anticipate will be the final passage of that extension, which again would make it so that rather than March 31st being the last day to apply, it would be May 31st. Again, it's the last day to apply. June would be the last day in which your application would be approved. Again, can't say that passed for sure, as it hasn't yet. Again, we anticipate that it will, but I'm sure that you will see more information on that later today. Again, we do anticipate that that is going to pass. And reason I bring that up, shuttered venue operators that are out there that are looking for the SBA grant, the most recent change, which I believe Trent and Marla will cover here in a minute, allowed so that individuals who are going for that grant could also apply for the PPP. So with this extension, it does give you a little bit more time to do so. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Trent to dive into the legislative text a little bit more, but appreciate everyone's time today. Appreciate you making time to jump on this webinar and look forward to hearing from you all in a few minutes.
Thanks, Marla and Justin and WTC Utah for putting this together. Always a great opportunity to meet with constituents and talk about the services and what we're trying to do out here in Washington. Like Justin said, sometimes the way we think things are going to work isn't necessarily how they end up working. Again, my name's Trent McFadden. I am a junior policy advisor for Senator Romney. I cover mostly economic policy issues, focusing on small business and labor issues. So the topic of today's panel is totally in my wheelhouse, but I just briefly wanted to go over the American Rescue Plan and some of what the American Rescue Plan did in modifying previous COVID legislation, particularly CARES Act legislation. You know, the CARES Act and all of the subsequent COVID packages did a lot for businesses right from the get-go. To go down the list, you know, paid sick and family leave. The CARES Act created the payroll tax credit so that if you had to either shut your business down because of COVID or reduce operations, that you could keep paying employees and get some and have the federal government help to cover some of those payroll expenses. There was the employee retention tax credit, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about how the American Rescue Plan modified both of those in just a minute. But then there's also in the American Rescue Plan, it adjusted and modified health insurance premium credits. And I bring that up mostly just to say, you know, if for smaller employers who maybe don't have an employee provided health insurance coverage, it's possible that you're having your employees go out and use the ACA exchanges. And so the American Rescue Plan increased the access to and the premiums that are available to your employees. So just something to probably keep in mind. There is a change in COBRA coverage through the American Rescue Plan. Tax treatment of 2 things: your idle advances, if you had received those, and restaurant revitalization grants. Previously, you know, the legislative intent was that those would not be treated as income, but then the IRS had made had issued some guidance saying that they would be. Congress has fixed that through legislation now. Obviously, unemployment insurance, and then one other kind of just small provision is dependent care FSAs. So if you have employees who are having a portion of their wages withheld to go into a flex savings account in order to pay for childcare or dependent care, then some of the provisions around that were changed. So like I said, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on paid leave. The American Rescue Plan modified the paid leave provisions. In the CARES Act, it was originally required that employers provide up to 10 days of leave for employees who were either subject to a quarantine or who had contracted COVID or who had to care for a quarantined family member. And originally that was only scheduled to go through April 1st of this year. The American Rescue Plan modified that and extended it through September 30th, but it also reset that 10-day limit. So each employee is still limited to 10 days. But if for some reason they had 10 days to care for a child back in 2020, and now they contract the virus after, say, April 1st, that 10-day limit for that employee is reset. The American Rescue Plan also modified the allowable uses. So your employees qualify for the paid leave provisions in the COVID bills if they're getting the vaccine, and the vaccine causes some adverse reaction. With second dose of Moderna and Pfizer, sometimes people have like a 24-hour flu, but the paid leave provisions in COVID relief now, you can qualify for those paid leave provisions if your employee is getting the vaccine or if they just have long-term effects from COVID. I'll also just add the one change for your accountants to keep in mind is the paid leave provision was previously applied as a credit against insurance or taxes that you were paying into the old age survivors and disability insurance. But now it will be applied against hospital insurance taxes. So still going, originally it was going towards Social Security taxes, now it's going towards Medicare tax. And then real fast, the employee retention tax credit, one change. Originally, CARES Act allowed up to $5,000 per employee during 2020 for wages paid. So it was covering 50% of up to $10,000. And this was a fully refundable tax credit, meaning that it would wipe out any tax liability that you owed, but then also give you back additional money from the government if you paid more in wages that were qualified for the employee retention tax credit than taxes owed. In later COVID legislation after the CARES Act, so late last year, they modified that to be up to 70% of wages of $10,000. So instead of $5,000 per employee, now it was $7,000 per employee. And that $7,000 per employee is still in place, but now instead of on an annual basis, it's $7,000 per quarter. So for employees who meet the qualifications for the employee retention tax credit, it's up to $7,000 per employee per quarter through the end of this year. The American Rescue Plan extended that provision through the end of this year. So an individual employee can qualify for up to $28,000 in employee retention tax credits, whereas before, in CARES, it was originally just $5,000 for the year. December legislation changed it to $7,000 per quarter, but it expired in June. Now the American Rescue Plan extends it through the end of the year. And I'll leave it there. There are other details, obviously, but just want to reiterate some of the points that Justin made. We want to be helpful to you. I know I just went through a bunch of minutia and got really deep, perhaps deeper than some of you care to, into the details of some of the legislation. But when we try to make things work for you, the details matter, and your accountants will care about those details. So with that, I'll say thanks for letting me participate. Senator Romney is here in DC to make things work for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marla.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this morning. And a special thank you to Justin and Trent for being a part of this webinar. We appreciate you presenting, but also listening to our constituent concerns and questions. And a huge thank you to the WTC Utah for hosting us this morning. So this presentation is primarily going to focus on Shuttered Venue Grant, which was the intent behind it. However, I do want to touch on some of the other SBA funding options available in case you all want to combine funding. Okay, so under our COVID programs, of course, we have the PPP program. Most all of you are familiar with the first draw and second draw PPP loans that are provided by our SBA lenders throughout the state. We have 435 lenders now providing loans to small business owners in the state. We also have our economic injury disaster loans, or what we call EIDL. We have a targeted EIDL advances that are still available, although right now those are available to low-income communities. Of course, we have our Shuttered Venue grants, which we're going to be talking about this morning, as well as our restaurant grant, which will roll out here shortly. Subsidy payments on existing loans, and then enhancements to our regular loan programs. Okay, next slide. So under the Economic Aid Act, both Justin and Trent touched on this. It provided $325 billion to small businesses across the state or across the nation. Nearly $285 billion for PPP loans, and that was at the end of December when that rolled out. You can see there are $15 billion for the Shuttered Venue grants, and then an additional $20 billion for targeted EIDL advance. Next slide. Under the American Rescue Act, which just rolled out, provided another $55 billion to small businesses throughout the nation. Over $7 billion more for PPP loans. And as Justin mentioned, that is likely going to get extended through the end of May to accept applications. SBA then has till the end of June to approve those loans, providing this goes through the Senate with approval. Can we go back? Hannah, thank you. A little over $1 billion more for the Shuttered Venue grant, so up over $16 billion for that grant. And then you can see there $28.6 billion for the restaurant grant, so that's pretty substantial. $15 billion for the EIDL advance, and then $100 million for the Community Navigator pilot program, which we will be rolling out here in our state soon. Okay, next slide. Okay, Shuttered Venue grant, which I know you guys are all waiting to hear about. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Eligible entities. So the PPP loans, as most of you know, are administered through our SBA lenders, as I mentioned. The grants, both the Shuttered Venue grant and the restaurant grants, will be administered by our Office of Disaster Assistance. They also do our EIDL loans as well. Okay, the eligible entities, and I'm going to dive kind of a little deeper on this because I know that most of you want us to focus on this morning. Business types, and you can see them all listed there. Hannah will provide this slide to all of you, or excuse me, this presentation to all of you, so you can use this as a reference, but I'm going to quickly touch on it. It includes live venue operators and promoters, theater producers, live performing art organizations, museum operators, zoos, aquariums, motion picture theaters, as well as talent representatives. You have to have been fully operational on February 29th, 2020. We're going to be looking at the gross earned revenue loss of at least 25% from one quarter in 2020 as compared to that in 2019, okay? And it has to be the same quarter that you're looking at. You have to have been intended to resume operations and not controlled by any entity on the National Securities Exchange. And you can see there the breakdown of FTEs versus half-time FTEs. Okay, next slide. So live venue operators, promoters, theaters, live performing arts. Here's the specifics of those. It has to be a defined performance and audience space. You have to have that with fixed seating. Okay, you have to have mixing equipment, lighting, public address system. You have to have paid tickets or a coverage charge, and performances are marketed via websites and social media, etc. And engage at least one or more individuals to carry out not less than 2 delineated functions within your business. Okay, for museum operators, this is going to be your principal primary business activity, okay? You have to have an indoor exhibit space, and you have to at least have an auditorium or a theater or a lecture hall with fixed seating, as I mentioned before. Motion picture theater, again, an auditorium where you have a large motion picture screen, fixed audience seating, again, is a requirement, projection booth, paid tickets, and then the movies are also marketed. A talent representative must have 70% or more of its operations that involve the representation or management of 2 or more audience or artists and entertainers. Okay, next slide. An applicant does not qualify if they meet any of the following. If they don't have a place of business in the US or primarily operate in the US. They present live performances or sell products of any sort of sexual nature. They received more than 10% of your 2019 gross revenue from the federal government. You own or operate venues or agencies in more than 1 country or more than 10 states, and or have more than 500 employees as of February 29th, 2020. If you have 5 or more affiliates who have already received a grant through the Shuttered Venue Grant. So again, you're going to have to coordinate with your affiliates in this regard. If you're a museum or affiliates that have received 10 million already in grant awards, okay? So again, coordination with your affiliates is going to be critical. Okay, next slide. The amount of our grants are going up to 10 million per business. You can also get a second grant up to 50% of the first grant. Okay, so if you're in operation on January 1st in 2019, the grant amount is 45% of the gross earned revenue during that year. Okay, and if you're in operation after January 1st, the grant amount is the average monthly gross earned revenue for each month while you're in operation in 2019, and then you multiply that by 6. So pretty straightforward. This will also be reduced if you get a PPP loan. So as Justin mentioned, if the PPP deadline is extended to the end of May, you can get a PPP loan, but it will be subtracted from the grant amount, okay? And then you can, the grants will either be dispersed in installments or lump sum. So we wanted to clarify the difference between gross earned revenue and gross revenue. And you can see there, gross revenue is equivalent to receipts received, okay? So that would be contributions, donations, and any other grants from sources. Gross earned revenue is the monies received from the sale of your goods and services or admission tickets, and that could be food and beverages, advertising sales, etc. Okay, so there's the difference. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is sort of the process you're going to want to go through. We are going to open this up, as John had mentioned in the chat. John Giggy is our deputy here, and he's trying to keep up with the questions in the chat. But we're going to be rolling this out on April 8th. You're going to want to have your SBA Form 3515 ready to go for this. The portal's going to open. It's going to be first come, first serve. Keeping in mind the next two bullets, which is in the first 14 days, the grants will only be eligible to those entities that have received 90% or greater revenue loss, okay? And then in the next 14 days, the grants will be to those eligible entities with 70% or greater revenue loss. Now, keep in mind, and I've told a lot of small business owners this already, 16 billion sounds like a lot of money, but this is nationwide, and this money is probably going to go rather quickly. So again, have your applications and all your documentation ready to go as soon as you're eligible to apply, whether it's in the first 14 days or the next 14 days or thereafter, if there's money still available. Revenue loss for the purposes of priority is based from April 1st through December 31st, 2019 and 2020, okay? You have to have had registered for a DUNS number. Now, that can typically take about 2 weeks. Folks are flooding in to get their DUNS number in the system. So if you have not already done so, or you don't have a DUNS number, do that right away so that you're ready to roll when the portal opens. You'll want to be registered in the SAM system, and you can see there the link for that. You're going to want to gather your documentation, the number of employees you have, your monthly revenue, and then you're also going to want documentation for your floor plans, contracts, things like that, as well as determine your gross earned revenue that you've experienced that loss in 2019 and 2020, okay? So it takes a little time to gather all this documentation, but it's really important that you have it ready to roll. We do have a checklist, an application checklist that's available. This is pretty straightforward, and it's a really good reference. And you can see there the link that we have to that. And I think we're going to, again, provide this presentation to all of you. And then you can stay up to date via the website, or if you sign up for our newsletter, we're continually pushing out updates just about on a daily basis for all of our COVID programs that we have to offer. Okay, I'm going to quickly, next slide, Hannah. Okay, the use of the proceeds, again, it's pretty broad in scope. You can see that. You can use it for payroll, rent, utilities, mortgage payments, debt payments, worker protection expenditures as it pertains to COVID, say, payments to independent contractors, other business expenses, maintenance costs, administrative costs, state, local taxes and fees, keep that in mind, operating leases that were in effect as of February 15th, 2020, insurance payments, go figure, advertising, production, transportation, capital expenditures, that type of thing. However, you can't use it to purchase real estate, and you can't use it to make payments on loans that you received after February 15th, 2020, or relending or anything political in nature. Okay, you can use it for costs incurred from March 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. And then the second grant, if there's funding still available and you're able to apply for a second grant, that would cover expenses through June 20th of 2022. But anything that you don't use within that first year of grant disbursement, you need to give that back, okay? Next slide. Okay, so more information there. And you can see we're going to be providing another webinar for applicants. This is going to be a national webinar, so you all can register for that, and there's going to be a link there in the presentation. Okay, next slide. Restaurant grants. Okay, so again, almost 30 billion in funding for the restaurant grant that we're going to be rolling out. We hope this is going to roll out more quickly than the Shuttered Venue grant did. from the standpoint of there were all kinds of hoops that ODA had to go through with OMB to set up a grant program of this magnitude. They already know how to do it. And so we anticipate this restaurant grant will roll out more quickly than the Shuttered venue grant. So $5 billion of this will be for eligible entities with gross receipts during 2019 of not more than 500,000. 23.6 billion will be distributed in an equitable manner to eligible entities of different sizes. Okay, and you can see there during the first 21 days, SBA will prioritize for women-controlled, veteran-controlled, socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses or those that are self-certified. Okay, and the covered period is February 15th, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. Okay, next slide. Eligible entities, and we're going to have more information on this restaurant grant as it rolls out, but we wanted to provide at least the basis information for you. Eligible entities includes restaurants, caterers, food stands and food trucks, and food carts, salons, inns, saloons, inns, taverns, bars, lounges, brew pubs, tasting rooms, tap rooms, etc. It also includes entity types located in an airport terminal. So keep that in mind if you are opening a business in our new airport, or if you're tribally owned. Okay, ineligible entities, you can see there, if you're a state or local government operated business, you will not qualify, or you're owned and operated and have more than 20 locations as of March 13th, 2020. Or if you have a pending application or received a Shuttered venue grant. So also keep that in mind, you can't have both, or publicly traded entities. Okay, next slide. Grants are awarded. Again, you have to show that you have the pandemic-related revenue loss. The maximum amount to each entity or affiliate would be 10 million or 5 million per physical location, okay? Grants are awarded in order of applications received. So keep that in mind, first come, first serve, similar to the Shuttered venue grants. Applicants will certify the uncertainty of the economic conditions, so they need to provide that to SBA, and then again, during the first 21 days we'll prioritize. Okay, revenue loss. Gross receipts during 2020 are subtracted from gross receipts in 2019, so you'll want to have all the documentation to be able to prove that. If an entity is not in operation at all in 2020, it equals the average monthly gross receipts in 2020 times 12 subtracted by the average monthly gross receipts in 2019, and then you multiply that times 12. If opened after December 31st, 2019, you're going to look at the equal to the expenses incurred minus gross receipts received, right? And then losses are reduced by the first draw and second draw PPP loans as well, right? So you would subtract that out. Okay, next slide. Use of the proceeds, again, pretty broad in scope, similar to the Shuttered venue grant. It includes payroll costs, interest, mortgage payments, rent, utilities, maintenance, supplies, food and beverage expenses, operational expenses, paid sick leave, etc. Okay, next slide. And again, I'm going to try to be rather quick on this because I want to make sure we have time for questions. Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, you guys probably are already familiar with this. First and second draw loans. Since January, when we rolled out the PPP as of March 20, I can't remember, I think it was March 20th or so, any rate, about a week ago, we were at 1.4 billion just in that short period of time with PPP loans here in Utah. So pretty significant. We want to continue to roll those out though to our small business owners. So you can see there for first draw loan, it would be 500 employees or fewer. Second draw would be 300 employees or fewer. Partnerships, LLCs, corporations, sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed individuals, tribal businesses, ag businesses, and nonprofits can all apply for a PPP loan. And in most cases, your PPP loan is going to be forgiven. You can work with your lender on the forgiveness benefits that apply. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are all the new eligible entities that were added in under the last two stimuluses that were passed. Local newspaper and television radio stations now qualify, destination marketing organizations, other 501c nonprofits, as well as internet publishing organizations. Okay, next slide. Use of the loan proceeds. I mean, obviously, most of this is intended to be used for payroll costs. But it can also cover mortgage interest payments, rent, utility, refinancing of an idle loan. You can use it for that as well. Interest on pre-existing debt, property damage costs, supplier, etc. Again, in bold there, you can see at least 60% is intended to be used for payroll costs to receive your full forgiveness. So just keep that in mind. Okay, next slide. First draw loans go up to 10 million. The maturity rate is 5 years, 1% interest rate, and there will be a payment deferment for loan forgiveness or 10 months, whichever is earliest. Okay, next slide. Second draw loans only go up to 2 million, maturity of 5 years, 1%. Seasonal employers can look at any 12-week period from February 15th, 2019 to a year later in 2020. So that's something else that was added in, which is kind of nice. And then single corporate groups may not get more than 4 million in total. Okay, next slide. Additional requirements, you can see there that you had to get a second draw, you had to have received a first draw PPP loan. It had to have been used for eligible expenses. Obviously, you have no more than 300 employees, and you can demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between the same quarters in 2019 and 2020. Okay, keep that in mind. Next slide. Here's the application process. You're going to want to find a PPP lender. Again, we have a lot of them in our state now, 435 plus. We keep getting more that are joining. But you can also go on SBA.gov lender match. There's a site there where you can pick out a lender if you don't have one that you're already working with, say. We can also provide a list of lenders to you if you don't have it. And then the complete application, that's what you're going to need if you're going to apply for a PPP loan. Keep in mind the application form is different for the second draw versus the first draw. And you can see there it's 2483, but -SD for second draw. And then you're going to need all the documentation to go with it. Okay, next slide. Economic injury disaster loans, most of you all are familiar with this as well. I'll just touch on it briefly. Next slide. Eligibility, small businesses, nonprofits, credit elsewhere. Businesses show that there is no credit elsewhere, still a requirement under EIDL, so keep that in mind. It does not apply to PPP. Independently owned and operated is also a criteria we use. These loans go up to 500,000 now and cover 24 months of economic injury. The interest rate is 3.75 or 2.75 for nonprofits, but the maturity rate, of course, is much longer. It goes up to 30 years, so your monthly payments are going to be substantially lower. And then we have a complete payment deferment for the first year. Okay, next slide. Proceeds. This is a little more restrictive. You can use it for fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that couldn't be paid. And then you can't use it, though, to refinance long-term debt. Now, keep in mind, you can use the PPP to refinance an EIDL, though. Okay. Again, the requirements are listed there. You do have to have an acceptable credit history. which the PPP loans are much more flexible in that regard. So also keep that in mind when you apply for an EIDL, and you have to show that you can repay it. Okay, next slide. Payment deferments here are listed. I'll just, you can see there, if you've made it in the calendar year, you've received the loan in the calendar year 2020, you don't have to make the first payment. It's going to be extended for 12 months to 24 months from the date that you receive your loan. Okay, and if you get it in 2021, the first payment due date will be extended from 12 months to 18 months from the date of the loan. Okay, next slide. Targeted EIDL advance, I just want to briefly touch on this. This is specifically for low-income communities right now, and SBA is reaching out to those small business owners in these communities to see whether or not they did receive an EIDL advance the first go around. We're making up the difference. So say they only received $2,000 the first go around, they then can get another $8,000 from SBA. But again, they have to be in a low income community. And there is a mapping tool on a SBA website where you can go in and check whether or not you are located in that community, okay? There's not much that you need to do on this, and SBA will be reaching out to all of you. If you have any questions, you can just reach out to us. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Some of the enhancements that we've made through the stimulus, it includes our SBA loan or our 7A traditional loans and our 504 traditional loans under SBA. And you can see there the lending enhancements that we've been able to make, as well as to our microloan program. Okay, next slide. And then we've had subsidy payments for existing SBA loans. And you can see there the specifics on those. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, so here's the folks that you're going to want to be working with. If you're interested specifically in applying for the Shuttered Venue Grant or the restaurant grant or even a PPP, if you want to work with the Small Business Development Center or the Women's Business Centers throughout the state, they can walk you through the application process. They can let you know specifically what documentation is needed and all of that. It's free counseling services. Both the Small Business Development Center network throughout the state and the 2 Women's Business Centers, those are funded by SBA. So they're there to assist you with all of our different lending programs that we have to offer and access to capital. Okay, and then next slide. This is just our district office contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us too. I have a staff. We have lending relations specialists on staff, economic development specialists on staff, outreach marketing specialists on staff, lawyers. Anyway, so if you want to reach out to us directly, feel free to do so. I have access now to the EIDL portal, so I can get in and check the status of people's loans. I also have direct access to leadership in the Office of Disaster Assistance. They're very responsive. So if you have a hang up and you're not hearing back from ODA on an EIDL loan or an EIDL advance or even the Shuttered Venue Grant or the restaurant grant, reach out to us directly, and I can then forward it on to leadership in ODA, and they will respond back to me, okay? And then there's just the websites listed. So with that, I would love to open it up for questions, Hannah.
Great, thank you so much for that presentation. We'll go ahead and start with one question that came from Jen. They were asking, if you have less than 90% revenue loss, can you apply on April 8th and you just won't be considered until the next 14-day timeframe, or how does that work?
Yes, everyone can apply right now, but those processing the loans at ODA will enforce the priority restrictions. But everyone can put in their applications right now, regardless of the revenue loss.
All right. Is full year revenue loss also an option if you've been in business before February 19th?
Is she referring to or he referring to the February 29th, 2020 operational requirement? Or was that 2019, the year 2000?
I think it was the February 29th requirement.
And are they asking if they weren't in business in 2019?
If you've been in business before 2019, is the full year revenue loss an option?
No, you have to compare a quarter from 2019 to 2020.
Got it. Thank you. If a venue has two businesses in it, one for bar sales and one for venue and ticket sales, can both gross revenue and loss be included in the application?
Yeah, that's similar to another question somebody asked if they had a restaurant and a live performing venue. And I would say the answer is yes, as long as, I mean, if they're two separate entities, perhaps with two separate EINs, if they meet the requirement, all the other requirements for their respective programs, then they would be able to both, yeah.
Perfect. And if a single business falls under two NICS codes, kind of like the numerous venues would that allow them to apply for round 2 of PPP as a drinking establishment so they can receive 3.5 times the payroll? And how would that affect the shuttered venues? Sorry, that was a lot of information at once.
Yeah. So they have what? They have two entities that have the same NICS code 72?
Two different NICS codes in the same entity. How does that affect their PPP and their shuttered venue?
I think they need to look at what their primary revenue generation is from to see which NICS code they would be able to apply under, or
okay.
As to whether they'll use the 2.5 or the 3.5 times.
Perfect. Do you know if universities are eligible, since their main business isn't to promote live events, but they have various affiliates who do?
I mean, that's a very tricky question depending on how things are set up. So I would refer them to our small business development centers, also to help them walk through the application process on those. So if you want to get into the details on that, see your local small business development center or women's business center, and they can, because there's different nuances there depending on whether they're separate entity or not, or they're just housed within the university, whether it's a private university or public university, those kind of things.
Perfect. So if someone wants to do a one-on-one with a local counselor, should they just reach out to their women's business center or their SDBC?
Yes, and if they go to those websites we put on there, they can refer to they'll have links to the various locations. We have 15 SBDCs across the state, good coverage in the 2 women's business centers.
Perfect. If a full audit is not economically feasible for their organization, what documents are acceptable? How do they get around the full audit requirement?
I thought under the recent FAQs that an audited financials weren't required anymore, but I'm not sure about that. And again, maybe you want to visit with your small business development center.
Perfect. And then will the application go through the SBA portal that is on the website, or is it going to be a different portal?
For which program?
For the shuttered venues.
So the Office of Disaster Assistance has a specific web page, website, where people have been going for the EIDL, to apply for the EIDL loans and grants. So they'll have a similar portal for the SVOG and probably the restaurant one too.
Okay, perfect. Well, I know we've got a restaurant-specific webinar coming up in just a few minutes. We've touched on all the questions for the shuttered venues. So Marla, John, if you have any last comments, love to hear them. If not, I think we're ready to wrap up.
Yeah, just thank you all for joining. And like I said, if you have any questions for us, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. To all those who have participated, we will be sending this recording along with the resources, the presentations, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.